Hey there, NASCAR fans! Have you got your copy of the latest edition of NASCAR Pole Position Print Magazine? If not, there's no better time than now to subscribe at polepositionmag.com. NASCAR Pole Position is the only print magazine covering NASCAR. Officially licensed by NASCAR, NASCAR Pole Position Magazine is published throughout the NASCAR season, and each edition is an instant collector's item, packed with great feature stories and photography. The magazine is even mailed to you in a poly bag for those who love to collect NASCAR memorabilia. At polepositionmag.com, you can even find past issues available to purchase. Get your subscription to NASCAR Pole Position and get great NASCAR content delivered straight to your mailbox throughout the season. Learn more at polepositionmag.com. That's polepositionmag.com.
Eric Estep here. One of my favorite parts of being a NASCAR fan is collecting diecasts. It's how I got my start on YouTube, actually. To me, a room is not complete until it features shelves of NASCAR diecast cars. It's as good a time as ever to continue your collection or begin an all-new one by pre-ordering your favorite driver's 2022 Next Gen diecast at lionelracing.com or at any authorized Lionel retailer. Lionel is the official diecast of NASCAR, and don't miss Lionel Racing's NASCAR Authentics diecasts at a Walmart or Target near you. Not only is Lionel the official diecast of NASCAR, but they're also official supporters of the Out of the Groove podcast network. So what are you waiting for? Head to lionelracing.com to order your favorite driver's 2022 diecast.
Hello, folks, and welcome back into Next Gen Creators, the Daily Downforce podcast, where we talk to the next generation of NASCAR content creators. Josh Lepowski here with you. And before you listen to today's episode, be sure to make sure that you are following us on social media at Daily Downforce on Twitter and Instagram, the Daily Downforce on Facebook, and also check out dailydownforce.com for some great NASCAR content every single day covering the biggest motorsport in the United States. And today, I'm Josh Lepowski, your host. Today, we bring in DJ Yee-J into Next Gen Creators, an iRacing NASCAR YouTuber, a very interesting niche in the NASCAR world, iRacing, and we talked to him about a variety of topics, about his content, how he got into content creation, his very intriguing content philosophy, and also talking about iRacing as well, and the development of the iRacing world and how that's become so important to NASCAR, and also talking about some of the iRacing NASCAR video game. We discussed that a little bit, and he has some very interesting perspectives on where he believes the next NASCAR video game can and should go. So we have all that coming up for you here. Without further ado, let's bring in DJ Yee-J into Next Gen Creators. And now it is time that we welcome in Justin Yee, DJ Yee-J, into Next Gen Creators. So Justin, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. That was a bit of a tongue twister there, wasn't it?
It was a little bit. I've practiced because I've obviously been researching you a little bit recently. I've learned how to, I guess, put all that together really quickly. So of course I did it live too, so that makes it, I guess, maybe a little more impressive, I guess, to some, according to that. But anyways, DJ Yee-J, Justin Yee here. I'm one of the most prominent iRacing YouTubers in the content creation space here today. Again, you and I were talking a little bit beforehand, the whole sim racing community, that sort of stuff has really just kind of taken off in NASCAR, or in the NASCAR world here in recent years. And so really cool to kind of get your perspective on some things. So to start off, let's get you some information about yourself in general. Can you tell me, to start out, how you got into both NASCAR, iRacing, and content creation as a whole?
So I live on the West Coast in Washington, and pretty much nobody was a NASCAR fan around where I grew up. I was known as the one kid who liked NASCAR for some reason. And the reason I got into it was, funnily enough, because when I was 3 years old, I had a play date with I'll call him a redneck friend, and his parents left NASCAR on the TV, and I didn't want to play with any of the stuff there. I just wanted to watch the TV with the cars going fast and turning left on it. And it was, ever since then, rest is history.
Do you know what race that was?
Oh, absolutely no way. I don't remember. I actually don't remember it, but my parents told me that I came back from a play day once and I wanted to watch NASCAR more. That's all I know. I don't even know what race it was. All I know is I like Jeff Gordon because he had the shiniest, most colorful car. So I was a Jeff Gordon fan for all up until then.
Oh, that makes sense. I was a Jeff Gordon fan growing up as well. So, you mentioned you got into NASCAR, and you said you were about 3 years old when you first got into the sport. So kind of tell me a little bit more about how, as you got older, how you got into things like content creation and iRacing as well.
So I never got into content creation until a couple years ago, and I started iRacing about almost a decade ago at this point. I got my first wheel as a present from my family for, I think it was Christmas, maybe it was birthday, when I was 12 years old, I want to say, maybe 13. It was a secondhand Logitech Driving Force GT, broken force feedback. Pedals didn't really work, but I downloaded NR 2003 because I saw all the YouTube videos about crash compilations and all that stuff. And I was super excited to play it. Had a lot of fun. I think I'd played NASCAR Thunder 2004 before then, mostly on controller or keyboard though. So getting into NR 2003, raced that for a while, did a couple full seasons, and then at some point I wanted to get iRacing, but it was expensive. I was like 14 years old. So what I would do is I would make new accounts every 3 months when I could use a promo code for $5 for 3 months for a new account. And I would just run pickup cup on those new accounts every single race for 3 months, then switch to a new account. I did that for, I think, over 2 years. I think I have like 8 or 9 accounts under random names just doing that. And then finally, one day I was like, okay, I got some money. Let's just start buying NASCAR stuff. And that was around 2018. So I was just out of high school then, and that's when I started actually driving an iRacing. In terms of content creation, it was kind of an accident that I started it. I had always joked with my friends that if I ever got to 5,000 iRating, I would start Twitch streaming. But I got to 5,000 iRating and I still didn't feel very good at the game. So I was like, well, I don't really want to stream if I don't feel like I'm going to provide anything. And then time goes on, I became really good at the iRacing ARCA series. I basically only race that because I hate cautions. Like they're so boring to me. Not for real racing, but for iRacing. I just hate the idea that somebody in the back of the pack can make me pace around for 4 laps, 5 minutes, something like that. So I just raced ARCA where there is no cautions, and I became the season champion for it. And a fun fact on that is my head-to-head battle for that season was Josh Berry. So we would go back and forth, and he would beat me most of the time. But where I beat him was one Daytona race where he crashed and I got second. And the difference in points there was so big that it overcome all the other times that he got first and I got second. And so at that point, I won that championship and I was like, okay, well, I think I got some cred now, even though no one cares about any of that, any of the in-season champions. I can kind of leverage that. And so I just kind of sat on it for maybe 2 months. And then the guy who was making the iRacing ARCA guides at that point, his name is PD Resch, Philip Resch. He stopped making them. And when he stopped making them, I was like, well, I'm going to try to make a ARCA guide and I'm going to title it iRacing ARCA Champion makes a guy or shows you how to do this track. And I posted that video, just no editing, no anything, just one straight through me talking about how to do it. And it got like 400 views on the first day on a brand new channel. And I was like, okay, well, I think that there is a niche here. And I did that for a long time. And then kind of everything started going from there.
Yeah, it's interesting. As I was researching you back, I noticed you had a lot of those like how-to instructional videos very early on in your life, just kind of or your channel's life, I should say, teaching people kind of like how to do different racetracks and that sort of stuff here on iRacing. And again, this is all kind of during this time frame where iRacing, it's iRacing's evolved a lot, in recent years. Like iRacing was it was very niche, I guess, if I could say that. When I was growing up, it was very niche, hard to get into, very expensive, as you mentioned, when you have the equipment, the game itself, the simulator itself, I should say, all the stuff you have to buy for it. Like the barrier of entry was a little high, so it felt like a little bit of a niche. But that's changed. It's changed significantly as time's gone on with the rise of things like esports and stuff like that. And you see how NASCAR is even supporting that sort of stuff. So, you kind of hit it at a really good time when iRacing was starting to really become more mainstream than it had been.
The perfect time to hit it would have been pandemic. If I started in 2020, I personally believe I'd be at 100K subs right now if I started at or before 2020, just because the content creation side was huge back then because everything was funneling into everything else. Even if the player base wasn't as big yet, the interest in it was as big as ever from a viewer perspective. There were a lot more people watching the iRacing on TV, the Pro Invitational series, and being like, "Well, man, how do I get into that?" Well, you don't really go to the website first; you look on YouTube first to see if that's something that a casual person would enjoy. And so there were some channels out there, and I'll call him out because he's a good buddy of mine, DLB TV. He got really big in that time frame, doing things that he's still doing now. But the interest back then was just so big from a casual perspective that he was even YouTube's trending creator for the week one week. He gained like 10,000 subs in 1 week or something like that just from because of the interest in iRacing itself was so huge back then, even if the player base wasn't that big. It's pretty interesting.
It is interesting, and it's been interesting just to see kind of how NASCAR and iRacing have kind of evolved over time. I want to get to that a little bit more here a little later, but I want to talk a little bit more kind of about you and kind of your channel. So, you kind of told your story how you got into NASCAR, content creation, iRacing, and that sort of stuff. You started you started out with those guides, then you started to make a bit of a change with your YouTube videos, and you became a little bit more topical in what you talked about. And as I was looking back through your channel, I saw the first video that was more topical was the most toxic race ever, I believe was the first one that got 69,000 views for you. So what kind of inspired you to make that sort of change to something a little bit different? It's not that you did away with the guides, but you've added something new to your arsenal.
Yeah. So I actually have moved my guides to a different channel. So Makoni Setup Shop, I work with them. They basically pay me to make the guides for them now. Those guys ended up like tanking my algorithm at a certain point, but they're a good stepping stone. And it's a good point. I considered myself to have pivoted completely no less than 3 times what I've done on my channel in the past 2 years. And they're all strategic. The first one was the toxic race one was a bit of an accident more so than the other ones because I just wanted to make one of those videos because I saw at the time you look up iRacing on YouTube and you look up what the most viewed videos are and they're all funny moments, rage. I actually was in one of them that has like 500,000 views from like 6 years ago or something like that back when the interest was really peak for that sort of content. So I thought to myself, like, well, I don't know how to edit videos. And a good way to learn would be to try to copy and make one of these videos. And my friend gave me a replay file. Shout out to Caden Anderson. He gave me a replay file of the most just toxic C Streeter race I've ever seen in my entire life, and to the point where it was just comical. So I was like, okay, I'm going to use this video here as an opportunity to start to learn how to edit videos and then also see like what is possible if I make this type of content. And then I made that video and it it had maybe 1,000 views for the first week ish and then it just started blowing up. It's actually what I like to call a chugger. So like it didn't get all of its views at once. It gets it very steadily, like it's still growing in views to this day. So after the first month, it was probably at 5,000 to 10,000 views. But still, before then, I had not had a video with more than 1,000 views. So that was huge for me. And making that video, I kind of accidentally put myself into a bit of a pickle because I did not want to make that type of content full time for a couple reasons. The first reason was it's negative. I don't mind having a negative video here or there. I'm not gonna try to say like, oh, I'm all about positivity, blah blah blah. But I don't want my channel to be full negativity, not just because of the toll that it would have on my mental, but because of how people's perception of me would become. And the second reason that that video was a bit of a conundrum was that it was just so it had me removed from it completely. Like there was none of me left in it. Anybody could have made that video and it would have gotten that amount of views. And so when I'm looking at what would grow my channel, it's me doing something that only I can do, or at least I have a face attached to it. I have a voice attached to it. I have some sort of my identity attached to the video. I think it's very hard to get consistent growth with not having an identity attached to it, because then people are watching it for the actual content, which is fine. But when the next video comes out, if the content doesn't resonate with someone completely, they don't have an identity to fall back on. So I kind of ended up splitting the middle after that video. I said, okay, I'm gonna start making stuff besides guides, but it's gonna have more of me in it, and it's gonna be more instructional, helpful, or entertaining, and less negative. And I never really made a video like that ever again, even though it was by far my best performing one at the time.
Yeah, that's interesting. And you kind of see that shift kind of in some of your more videos that you made after that. The next video I wanted to discuss is your video on the underdog story, which is your most viewed video at this point. And you talked about a video that has you in it. You had an interesting role in that whole story of the Podium 500 with Lake Peterson, all that sort of stuff. I mean, just first of all, I mean, what struck me about that video that was so interesting is you had such a role in it because you referred to yourself as his lawyer in that video and help to get that result reversed. But at the same time, you were able to pull together a bunch of different perspectives on that very controversial race and was able to make a very objective video out of that, which is, in my views, I consider that really impressive. So just kind of walk me through. You mentioned how you wanted videos that kind of had you in it. That video had you in the story. So just kind of walk me through kind of how that video came about, because that was interesting how it kind of ties into some of what you were telling me.
Yeah. So I'm actually facing that issue again, funnily enough, is my best performing videos are the documentary style videos, and how do I put me in it? And I think the answer is becoming I don't have to, but then I have to really bring good stories every time if I don't. But what made it the perfect storm with the Lake Peterson video is I was always going to make a video about that. So that event happened a month after I started YouTube. So I could have made that video instead of making that toxic race video. I could have made the Lake Pearson video right there and then instead. But I was very, very scared to make that video because I'm not an editor. I don't really have editing skills. I don't do any After Effects. I don't really know how any of that works. But when I got into 2024 this year, I was like, okay, I think fundamentally I understand how a documentary is supposed to work. Had the structure of it, the pacing of it, the storytelling. I watch a ton of YouTube. I watch almost no iRacing YouTube, almost no NASCAR YouTube even. I keep up with them, but the main content I watch, you'll probably see reflected on my channel because I copy all of the content that I watch into an iRacing context. But when it came to the mini docs, I came into this year and I thought to myself, I am probably good enough to make this video now. And so I was trying to get it done before this year's Podium 500 so that they could get more entries for it. But it just ended up taking too long. Getting all the names for it. Everyone in that video I already know to a degree. The only person that I didn't really know super well was Garrett Maines, but he was easy to reach out to and contact. The events themselves, they really like the story was so crazy. I didn't have to do anything special besides remember what happened and bring up the replay files and all that. So making the video there, I knew it was going to be my most viewed video if I executed it correctly. And then I released it. And for the first week, it was an 8 out of 10 video, which was devastating to me. I thought that, well, one, I know the thumbnail's bad on it. And I was like, wow, I can't believe I fumbled a video like that with a bad thumbnail. But for whatever reason, after it reached the first audience, YouTube gave it a chance on the wider audience, and it performed as I expected it to perform with a wider audience, and that's what allowed it to get to that amount of views. And I still haven't changed the thumbnail because I don't want to jinx it because it's still doing good.
Yeah, and again, I mean, your role in that story again was just very interesting how everything played out. Can you kind of dive a little bit more into kind of like how you got so involved in that story? Because again, being it was a result that was overturned one way,
Yeah.
then it was overturned back the other way. I'm trying to be general because I want people to watch your video,
Yeah.
but I'm trying to be general, but just kind of give me more insight into how you got
Yeah.
involved in that.
So Lake is one of my best friends in real life. I got him into iRacing. I was actually just at his bachelor party in Vegas last weekend, uh, which is pretty funny. And we were at a Dream Racing down in Vegas. We got to drive real race cars. It was crazy. I should have taken a picture with him and posted on a community post. But yeah, we were Lake was the only person I played iRacing with besides our other friend Noah. So when we signed up for the Podium 500, we were just doing it just because it was fun. And I was nobody back then. Nobody knew who I was. I didn't have a Discord server to race with. I didn't have anybody who would recognize me and say hi in races. I didn't iRace with anybody back then. I was just doing it on my own with Lake and Noah. So at that point, when we signed up for that, I didn't make it to the final round, but Lake did. So I was a spotter for the race. I was a spotter and his crew chief, and all those decisions that I talk about in the video that was made not only by Lake but by me as well. But I think it's a better story just to have Lake more as the focal point because I get to be the focal point of the rest of my videos. And so I kind of remove myself from it because if I added myself in a bigger role into the video, I think I would have overstated what I did just because it's hard not to because I see it from my perspective the whole way through. And I think it's a more interesting perspective to remove myself completely from it. And because of that, I got to be really close to everything that happened and know exactly what happened, but also tell a good story.
Hmm. Yeah, and again, if you want to know the full details, please go ahead and check out DJ Yee-J's channel and check out that video, the greatest the under I don't have the full title listed here, but it's the group something like greatest iRacing underdog story, something like that. It was a really
Yeah.
cool one. And something that you did in that video that I think helped you, and you did this also, and I saw it in your Roger Carruth video a little bit as well, to kind of take your perspective and try to, out of it somewhat to kind of give multiple perspectives is using interviews with other people and talking, using their quotes, that sort of stuff to kind of let them tell the parts of the story that they can tell. And you mentioned how, you're not someone that does a lot of After Effects or anything like that. So the way you kind of edit it, and this is what I like, the style that I thought when I was watching it, is it feels almost like an elongated news package, almost to an extent, almost like a documentary, kind of like you said, like how some of those videos are, of allowing people to kind of tell some of those stories. And again, these are some of your videos that are outside of like the guides and stuff like that you've done, which are pretty self-explanatory. But you've been able to find a way through the stories themselves to make something despite some of the limitations that you've admitted you have.
Right. And I watch a lot of videos and try to find creators that are like myself because there are creators out there who are really good at telling stories and then they also at the same time don't do a ton of fancy editing. The biggest one that comes to mind is Summoning Salt. Like Summoning Salt at these days he does some fancy editing stuff, but the core of his documentary style videos is the storytelling. And I think that the audio portion of a video, of a YouTube video, is so much more important than the actual video portion of it that that leads my philosophy into how I make the videos.
Hmm. Yeah. And so obviously we've talked a lot about your videos, your documentary style stuff, that sort of stuff, but at your core, you're still an iRacer. That's what you are, that's what you've done, and that sort of stuff. I mean, we talked about it a little bit earlier, but man, just how much that this community has evolved over time and how much that it's changed and all this sort of thing. I mean, it's a much different and it's a much bigger community kind of that I've seen. And being someone that's not as familiar with it, because again, I'm not someone that's on iRacing, one thing that kind of strikes me is how much community there is within it in the little bit of time that I've spent kind of looking at it from the outside. A lot of community, a lot of guys out there that want to see people do well. It's very competitive, but there really is a sense of respect amongst a lot of competitors. Obviously there are moments where things get crazy. That's just part of how it is. But there are a lot of people out there that have genuine respect for each other, and that's something that really strikes me about it. So can you kind of tap into kind of where some of that comes from?
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes from the roots of iRacing. So iRacing started from the developers that made NR 2003, and the first few years on iRacing, the community was more like just a bunch of friends getting on to race with each other. There wasn't much to race for. They did have a pro series, but the prize money was pretty low for the time. And the amount of money that they were spending back then, iRacing was more expensive in 2009 than it is today. And even when you add inflation into it, people were more or less paying almost double for iRacing back then than they are today. And so you really only have a certain type of person on iRacing back then. And that kind of created sort of a community standard. And iRacing themselves loves to maintain that standard. There are a lot of things that I like about how iRacing enforces that. There are some things I don't like about how they enforce that, but it's really at its core a gentleman's game, which is very weird because there's not much like it out there. Like there are not many games out there where you can be permanently suspended for saying a bad word. It, it mostly is voice chat on iRacing, but if you go too far, they will just straight up ban your account. And what that has led to these days is kind of a lot of clashing between the kids and the more experienced people. But in general, the community, in my opinion, is a lot closer knit because of some of those policies that iRacing upholds that carries over from all the way back from the beginning.
Hmm. Yeah, you're right. And I mean, obviously, I choose my words a little bit carefully because obviously, there have been a lot of controversies on iRacing, that sort of stuff amongst the community that and all of that. But again, I've just been amazed in that video about how there is a lot of respect amongst those people. And it is something that, I mean, it's one of those things that like, I mean, it's a genuine skill that you have to work at and get better at because I mean, iRacing is not like a normal video game. You're not just taking a controller and doing that. It's about as close to driving a real race car as you can get without actually driving a race car. Or being a NASCAR driver and having access to the simulators they have. It's about as close as you can get. And so as a result, there has to be a higher standard of competition and a higher standard of conduct in something like iRacing.
Right. Yeah, I the way that iRacing does it these days is a lot more streamlined, which helps. I call it getting the kids out of here, but at the end of the day, there are a lot of people that kind of just sign up for iRacing and treat it less seriously than maybe they should. And I don't think that's an issue unless they are directly affecting other people, like their enjoyment of it, their seriousness that they take it. When you're just messing around in unofficial races or rookies and stuff like that, it's whatever. But there are genuinely talented people out there that can go out and on a bad day just screw up everybody if they want to. And it's sort of like it's like a it's like an agreement that everyone has that we're not just going to go out and ruin their day. And sometimes sometimes it fails. Sometimes there's people that get the reputation. Certain real life NASCAR drivers can get the reputation that they'll just go out and ruin your day if they feel like it, and that makes it a lot less fun. But for the majority of the time, it really seems to uphold that.
Hmm. What has it been like to see NASCAR adopting iRacing the way or adopting iRacing the way it has the last few years. You talk about the Pro Invitational, but you also talk about how other guy or how the importance of simulators in the sport today. You have guys like Dale Earnhardt Jr. that have been public advocates for things like iRacing. What has it been like for you to be to gain that sort of respect and gain that sort of and gain that sort of, trying to find the right word here, recognition from NASCAR in a lot of regards, recognizing iRacing for what it is and what it can be?
Yeah, it's interesting because NASCAR tried to make the esports leagues for all their console games work for a while, and it just never really worked. And I don't really know if the super serious esports stuff on iRacing works either, but it definitely works better than what the console games were doing. And I think iRacing recognized that, and that's what kind of led to them to get more involved with the sim side, because the best way to get people interested in the sport is to have them try it themselves. I mean, NASCAR Thunder 2003, NASCAR '06, those type of games, those really did get a lot of kids interested. Like, you listen to a lot of kids who don't really have a NASCAR background who were interested in NASCAR back in the 2000s. It was because they played a video game. And I think that unfortunately iRacing is not accessible to the kids of that age. And I don't know if you really want iRacing to be accessible to the kids of that age at this point, but that also just shows the importance of the NASCAR console games and where NASCAR's been kind of screwing it lately with the lack thereof or the poor quality ones. It's not getting that next generation involved as much. But for the kids who grow up a little bit older, get into their teens, and get into iRacing, that is the perfect way to get somebody engaged in the sport. That makes lifelong fans, and I think and NASCAR knows that at this point. I think that they were kind of reluctant to adopt it for a while. I think that they thought that iRacing was just for their older, rich client fans to get that sort of experience. But I think iRacing is also understanding the later on that we get that it's also for those teenage year kids, especially. And the biggest thing is that iRacing is expensive, but it's not that expensive anymore. It's not unheard of for kids to spend $200 a year on Fortnite V-Bucks or Robux or anything like that. And the $60 per year iRacing subscription fee plus maybe the $200 per year that you'd probably need to spend on content to do races that you want to do, that is a lot less daunting to the kids of these days than it was to the kids of the 2000s.
That's an interesting point you bring up because, I mean, gaming, I mean, and again, when I was growing up, as an adolescent in the 2010s and that sort of stuff, like gaming really was a lot different back then. You mentioned it wasn't as common to buy stuff like that with your own money. It was kind of just starting and it was kind of taboo, and a lot of people didn't like that. I mean, there's a lot of people that still don't love the idea of, like, they call them microtransaction, all those sorts of things. But as you mentioned, like, it's becoming more common for people to spend this kind of money on video games. So iRacing isn't really all that different from a game like Fortnite, like you said. That's a really interesting point that you bring up, and it just proves iRacing's in a much, iRacing's in a much different place. You could argue iRacing in a lot of ways was probably ahead of its time, considering the fact that it came out in 2008. Even NR 2003 was ahead of its time in a lot of regards.
Yeah, definitely the pricing structure was ahead of its time. That was just unheard of back then. Like, what, World of Warcraft maybe had a subscription fee back then. I guess I played Club Penguin as a kid that had a membership fee. So it wasn't completely unheard of, but for a racing game especially, it was unheard of, and that's what kept most people away. And now you look at the racing games these days, for oval one, there's nothing. So you got iRacing, you got nothing. You can do NR 2003 leagues. That's pretty cool. It is pretty cool to have that juxtaposition where if you really want to start out, you can play it for free on NR 2003. But if you want to get serious, then you cough up the money for iRacing. So that honestly, I think that's a great back and forth dynamic that those two games have. But for other racing games, especially for the road side, you're seeing more of the console games lead into more of those microtransaction, Forza, Gran Turismo, Like the average player in those games is probably spending fairly close, or at least a significant amount compared to what an average iRacer spends. And what that leaves last is the games like R Factor, Assetto Corsa, all that stuff. Well, R Factor has almost as many DLCs as iRacing has. Assetto Corsa, you drive the GT3 car and you're gonna like it, you know. So it's almost like iRacing is still the most expensive option, but the value that you're getting for it in terms of pure content is getting closer to what everything else is. And what I've always said about iRacing to the, because I get a lot of people in my comments, a lot of iRacing haters, especially in shorts, because that gets fed to people no matter if they like it or not. So you get a lot of people saying how much of a scam iRacing is. But the point of iRacing is that you are paying for the ability to race whatever car you want at any hour of the day with a field of people that are somewhat similar to your skill level. There is no other game that can do that for more than one or two cars right now besides iRacing. And when you factor that in, the price of iRacing, if you can afford it, is a no-brainer.
Yeah, and we've seen how something like iRacing, how it's helped launch the careers of NASCAR drivers. You think of guys like Ty Majeski, William Byron, Roger Carruth. You made a video about Roger Carruth. Great video. So I mean, we're seeing the value of iRacing, how it's, it's we go back to our discussion about NASCAR, how it's bringing a lot of value to NASCAR in the sense that it's developing NASCAR drivers. Now, not everybody that's on iRacing is going to be a NASCAR driver. You still have to prove yourself on a real racetrack at some point. But I mean, it also you could argue kind of lowers that barrier of entry for some people and gives them the opportunity to show their skills without having to buy a car or go to a racetrack. So, you talked a little bit about console games, and I want to discuss that a little bit too, because obviously iRacing has recently acquired the license for NASCAR console video games, which is a thing a lot of people are excited about. There's also probably a little bit of apprehension too, because iRacing has never developed a NASCAR console video game. They're obviously bringing in the help of Monster Games to develop the NASCAR Heat games, all that sort of stuff. So, I mean, iRacing and a NASCAR console game, a lot of people are excited about it, and they're excited to see it come out next year. So, as someone who's very familiar with iRacing and familiar with NASCAR video games in general, can you give me kind of what you expect from that video game?
Yeah, I think that game's going to be a lot closer to the monster games than it is going to be to iRacing, just because iRacing doesn't want to split their player base. If they That's going to be their cash cow as iRacing. Those are people that are going to be paying month after month, buying extra content. The NASCAR game, they're going to be targeting more at the casual racer, and because there's just nowhere for them to go right now. Like, you still got people playing NASCAR Heat 4 and the 2021 mod or whatever it is, or the DLC, and they have nowhere to go. They're not going to buy NASCAR Ignition. So I think that iRacing is going to use monster games. It's going to be a very new player friendly game. It's not going to be like uber realistic, in my opinion. I think it's going to end up pretty much like NASCAR Ignition, but good. And that's my hope. And I hear they're going more into the career mode side of things, because that's really what's missing right now. There's just no career mode. That's what everybody loved about the games as a kid. That's the whole point of Dirt to Daytona. That's the whole point about all of these games where you start out on the lower series and you make your way up. And there's been stuff like that in the past decade or so, but there's been no story to go along with it. Oh boy, I got a text from a random truck driver. I feel so cool right now. It's like, no, there needs to be an actual story. That's what made the F1 game so good. That's what has people tolerating those, and they're getting rid of that too, which is kind of funny. But I think that it's going to be like a monster games type game, and hopefully iRacing, what they're adding to it is the ability to add a greater story mode, and which I think they're going to, because iRacing also said they're adding a career mode to single player iRacing, and they wouldn't be doing that if they weren't already doing it on the console game.
So with that, you mentioned how you believe it's going to be more of a monster games type of a game, which would make a lot of sense. But one of the complaints a lot of people had with the NASCAR Heat Games from the late 2010s was the driving model. Not a lot of people liked the driving model very much. So the hope is that, I guess, from a lot of people, is that NASCAR 25, whatever it's going to be called, that's the working title right now, is going to have a driving model that's going to be a little bit better than it was in those games. Do you think that iRacing's help with Monster Games is going to change that at all? Or do you think iRacing is going to remain very hands off with that? Because as you mentioned, you can't make an iRacing driving model work on a console video game. It's just not, it would alienate casual players. So what do you expect iRacing to have much of an impact on that?
My opinion on people that complain about the console games driving models, I might be off base on this, but I think most of those players who complain about it are the ones who are serious enough about driving on a game to where they should just go play iRacing if they want it any better. Because the whole point of making the driving model for a console game is so that 6-year-old Timmy can pick up the game and drive a lap around Kansas Motor Speedway. He might hit a wall or two, but he's going to get back to the start finish line and he might gain 3 positions and think about how cool the game is. I think that you can't make a driving model that does that while also having the top level drivers in the game feel like they're challenged or feel like it's responsive to them or feel like that they're being rewarded for driving good. Because honestly, the point of a NASCAR game to an extent is not to reward people that they're driving good. I think that there should be at least a driving model that can get everybody involved to a certain extent. Now, if they can figure out a way to do that while also rewarding those people that take the game more seriously, that's amazing. But I don't expect them to do that because I don't know how I would do that. Because even with NR 2003, that wasn't made to be an accessible console game for kids in 2003. That was made to be the more serious game on a PC, which was crazy at the time, that the people who are really into NASCAR can buy a wheel and go race that game. I don't know if it's possible to make a driving model that's designed for a controller and also feel amazing and rewarding for people that are driving on a wheel or people that are higher level on controller. That's just my opinion, though.
Yeah, it's an interesting opinion, and it's definitely, you make some very interesting points about that, and it's probably the thing people are watching the closest with the next game is how's the driving model going to look? Because I mean, again, that was the biggest complaint with those NASCAR Heat games was a lot of people did not like the driving model compared to other games in the past. So I'm curious to see how a lot of that works out. So, Justin, we've talked a lot about iRacing, a little bit about your content creation, that sort of stuff. I want to switch gears more and talk a little bit more about yourself kind of as a person, kind of shed some light on kind of who you are outside of being a YouTuber and an iRacer. So you mentioned, you do iRacing, that sort of stuff. What is kind of give me like some insight into kind of like what your normal day-to-day life is to an extent. Do you have a job outside of content creation? What sort of stuff do you do? You mentioned you're from the Pacific Northwest in Washington. So interesting area there that you're from. So give me a little bit of insight into into the Justin away from the mic and away from the rig.
Yeah. So this is not full time for me. I just do this part time in my spare time as a hobby. My day job, I'm an engineer out here. I do quality audits and sample and testing and all that fun stuff for a safety certification company. I basically travel to factories and tell them what they're doing wrong and don't tell them how to fix it. So they love me.
That's pretty cool.
But yeah. So
someone's got to do it.
Yeah.
Someone's got to do it.
Yeah, the government says so. So I'm one of the people that does it. I get to travel some cool places for work. My main territory is out here in the Northwest, but recently I've been covering places like Alaska and California and out in Wyoming and some places like that. So that sometimes cuts into time I have to make videos, but this year I've slowed down my stuff enough just because I don't I'm past the phase where I want to grow as much as possible, as quick as possible. And now I'm just trying to keep what I have and build something that's steady and sustainable. Other than that, I play a lot of iRacing, but I don't do many races. I mostly do coaching. That takes up a lot of my time in the game. I do a lot of guides still, um, the occasional race, and then recording stuff for videos, of course. But I probably have put more time this year into Counter Strike than I have put into iRacing, and I am nowhere near as good in Counter Strike as I am in iRacing. But that's the game that all my friends play together, so that's pretty fun.
So you
Um,
like you like
yeah.
Counter Strike? What other games do you like to play? Other video games?
Uh,
Not just nowadays, but even like growing up. Aside from
yeah.
iRacing, what other games do you like to play?
So I guess my first content creation I ever did was I had a Club Penguin blog back in 2009. That was really cool. I was stoked because it got like 10,000 views total or something like that. Most of it was probably my own views, though, to be quite honest with you, clicking between pages. But I had a couple fans back then, which always made me feel really good. I think that's probably what led me to want to do content creation later, is because I knew like that feeling of having people kind of appreciate what you do, even at that level. Um, so I played that. I played it after that. I played a ton of Minecraft in middle school, going into high school, and then now, kind of after college, after all of that, I mostly play Counter Strike, a little bit of Valorant if we rage at Counter Strike too much. I play some Brawlhalla. That's like my I need to waste time game waiting for something. And then I've been really into Balatro this year. That's probably my favorite game that's come out this year.
Interesting. I played a lot of Minecraft in middle school as well. Talk about a game that's changed a lot over the years. I don't
Yeah.
know. I mean, I will admit I'm kind of scared to go back to it because I'm just scared that I'm going to go back and not know anything about what's going on.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we only really played those game modes too. Like our favorite one was Bridges, where you would be on one of four teams on an island and you have to mine resources for 10 minutes. And then at 10 minutes, all the bridges build up and then you can go attack the other islands and the last one standing wins. That was kind of what our go to was back then. We didn't play much survival. We had a phase where every year we would try a survival world for about a week before we got bored of it and then went back to doing what we were doing before then. But yeah, I haven't played Minecraft in a while. It looks cool, but too much to keep up with.
Yeah, it is a little too much to keep up with. Games in general are getting harder to keep up with nowadays
Yeah.
because it's just everything's much different and that sort of stuff. So, I mean, you talked about, I mean, you have this career as an engineer. You're obviously working, you're obviously working on YouTube, kind of that sort of stuff. How much longer do you envision yourself doing YouTube? Do you want to keep doing it for the rest of your life if you can? Is there a time or maybe that takes over your career or vice versa? Your career kind of takes over for your time from that and
Hmm.
from iRacing and that sort of stuff. Is there, do you have a vision for that at this point?
I don't really have any big plans like that because I don't want to commit to being able to provide something that's useful for that long because I don't even know what ideas I have for videos in a month. Like I don't know when the well is going to dry up. I don't know when I'm going to run out of time to do it completely. One day I feel like I'm just going to fall off the face of YouTube, and because I don't think anyone, I wouldn't say no one would care that I left, but you can kind of just stop one day and maybe a year later people will be like, oh yeah, what about that guy? But I don't think it would be that crazy. I think I don't have a timeline of how long I'm going to still continue to make videos. I don't. I probably will be making videos for the next year or two, uh, if I had to guess. Maybe even 5 years from now, if I still enjoy it. But if I'm not enjoying it, then it's not worth it as a hobby. And so when I stop enjoying it, it's when I'm going to stop making videos, and it's not going to be any time before, and it's not going to be any time later.
Interesting. That's very interesting. So, being someone, and I want to expand this out about NASCAR here a little bit. You mentioned you're from Washington, so that's obviously not an area. I mean, there's only one NASCAR race in the Pacific Northwest nowadays. That's Portland. I don't know. I didn't ask you how many races you've been to, if you've been to any races, but I'm curious to ask you. Where do you feel NASCAR could host a race in the Pacific Northwest? Would you like to see a cup race in Portland? Do you think there's other places they should consider? And also, secondary to that, what other have you been to any NASCAR races before, being somewhere that's not necessarily that doesn't have really much of any NASCAR races in it?
Yeah. So I've been to the first two Portland races. I missed this year's. My family's from around that area, but I kind of live away from there now, so I didn't make it back there for the race this year. Um, I've been to Texas last year, and I went to Road America and Portland the year before that. So I've been mostly to road course races. I went to Daytona this year, but I didn't see any races because of the rain out, and I had to go back for work, which was fun. That was unfortunate, but I'll probably end up back there eventually. Um, as for where they can do a race in the Pacific Northwest, I don't think Portland has the garage space to host more than one series at a time. I think that's the main issue with it, and they also don't have enough seats for Cup to be there. So Portland would have to build up their infrastructure, the track for that race, and I don't trust the local government of Portland to do that. So we'll see. But there's really nowhere else. There used to be that short track, the short oval in Portland as well, that got demolished in the late 90s. There's Evergreen Speedway up in Washington, which doesn't nearly have enough capacity for any race besides an ARCA race. And then just little tiny ovals here or there that wouldn't really be a fit for anything NASCAR. I think ARCA is going to, I think they're going to Tri Cities this year, which is interesting. That's a tri oval, really old paved tri oval, which would be fun to drive, honestly, but that'll be fun to watch too. It would have to be a street course. It'd have to be like Seattle street course or something stupid like that. But that's my best guess.
Seattle will be an interesting street race because I've been to Seattle, and that's a very hilly city, so there'll
Mhm.
probably be a little bit of elevation change. I remember I think I was at the market there, I believe, one time, and I remember looking up towards downtown, and there was just this hill with these buildings kind of like climbing up, and I was like, wow, this is so interesting. But but like you said, I mean, being a NASCAR fan from that area, that's a very interesting dynamic. So, Justin, we've kind of talked about a little bit of everything, talked a little bit about your story as a NASCAR fan, a little bit about you outside of iRacing, as an engineer, that sort of stuff, some about your YouTube videos and that sort of stuff. So, I'll finish off this question. I'll finish off with this because you and I talked about it beforehand. You called yourself a YouTube nerd is kind of what you mentioned. So, being a YouTube nerd, kind of give me some insight into number one, kind of how that works and kind of what that, how that affects your videos. You discussed it a little bit to this point, and how you feel that could impact, your sort of legacy you'll kind of have here on YouTube, given the fact that you don't totally know how long you'll be doing it for.
Yeah. Yeah, I just watch a lot of YouTube, right? So probably way more than I watch any other sort of media. I don't have a Netflix account. I don't have any of that. I just watch YouTube. Um, and when I watch YouTube, I've gone to the point ever since starting to make videos where I'm trying to understand why things become successful and why things fail at the same time. Because people like to say, oh, the algorithm hates me. Oh, it's not my fault. Oh, blah, blah, blah. But at the end of the day, it's two things. It's a fairly simple math equation from YouTube's end, but that's coupled most importantly with the psychology of the people who choose to watch or not watch a video. Neither of those two things are anything without each other. The algorithm might have a great formula how to maximize their profits, but doesn't if it isn't able to capture the psychology of a large group of people, then there is no use for it. And the other way around, you can have all that data of what people click and don't click on, but if you don't do anything with it, then it's going to be inefficient how they run the algorithm. So in my opinion, and I think the most logical reasoning is that YouTube wants to make the most amount of ad revenue possible on their end. And every decision that they make with their algorithm, I think is influenced by that simple fact. So I think that you can extrapolate that and kind of bring it into a context of, okay, is my video making more money for YouTube than somebody in a similar niche? If the answer is yes, then you're probably getting the share of views. If the answer is no, they're probably getting the share of views. And one might be able to funnel into the other, but you want to be at the top of the stream rather than the bottom of the stream. And so I take those couple concepts, and when I'm watching videos, well, first off, when I click on a video, I'm like, why did I click on that video? What led me to click on that video? Because I'm not a graphic artist. I suck at Photoshop, but I still have to make thumbnails one way or another. And so if I can kind of take those ideas that I think I'm seeing from other people that are seeing success and can put them in the context of my own stuff, I think that that maximizes my ability to perform at a similar level to theirs. And then when I'm actually watching the content, I'm thinking to myself, how are they keeping me engaged? Well, first off, am I engaged? Do I want to stay watching this video? Do I want to click off? If I want to click off because I'm bored, why am I bored? It's never just because, oh, I'm bored. There's always a reason why you get bored of something. Maybe they linger on a topic for too long. Maybe they spend too long talking about the context of something. Maybe they started with a ton of action, but then went back into a lull and you kind of were expecting that action the whole way through. Honestly, just storytelling concepts, right? You learn them all in English. I think these days, out of all of my high school and college classes, I use my English classes more than anything else. Just how to write, how to argue something, how to structure an analysis of something. I use all of that way more than I even use any of my math classes for my engineering job. But between YouTube and my regular job, I use English skills much more, which I think is very interesting because back then I consider those classes to be the most useless because I didn't feel like I was learning anything. But in reality, I was learning stuff that would actually help me in the future. And so when I watch videos like that, for instance, one of my favorite channels is Scott the Woz. He does video game, mostly around Nintendo and retro games, pretty much video essays, but he adds humor into them. He adds sometimes a storyline that carries on throughout the whole way. He adds little quips every probably 20, 30 seconds. And putting all that together, it makes a 20-minute to an hour to 2 hour even package where you never feel like you want to click off the video. And so it's for channels like that where I say, how can I do what he's doing with my skills and my subject? And that's where I start to get my ideas from. I do a bunch of trial and error. I've made so many types of videos that have experimented and done well. And I've made tons of videos that I experimented and did poorly. And it's just learning from that. Why did it fail? Oh, I have 5% less click through rate through the first hour, which means that my normal viewers don't care about this topic. So I need a topic where my normal viewers care about first and foremost before trying to expand for everything else. It's just a bunch of things like that that I could go over for a long, long time. But it's basically trial and error plus learning from what other people are finding success in, and then also avoiding what I believe other people are underperforming with.
That's interesting. I mean, someone that's you strike me as someone that's a lifelong learner, and that comes from, again, just like, thinking about the way that YouTube works and that sort of stuff. And it's interesting how you're able to kind of use that different skill set to make your content very intriguing, entertaining, appealing to people, that sort of stuff, without maybe some of the bells and whistles that other people do. That's really striking, and that's very interesting. And I believe it's probably inspiring to a lot of content for aspiring content creators that maybe don't have some of the fancy tools that a lot of other people have.
Yeah, for sure. I think that my videos would perform better if I had the best looking thumbnails of all time, if I had really fancy editing that wasn't just to be fancy, but actually service the video, transitions that make things look more professional, on screen graphics that can help drive a point together. Those are the things that I want to be able to do eventually. But I don't know if I have the time to, I want to invest the time in. But at the same time, I understand how they can improve my videos. And then just avoiding also the stuff that's frivolous, that doesn't really matter. Like the 10-second intro screens that are like the craziest graphics you've ever seen, but it's 10 seconds of your name and people click off because they're bored and want to see what you're actually trying to talk about. So it's just avoiding stuff like that while also doing the fancier stuff that actually helps prove your point at the same time.
So I think off of that, I think the perfect place to finish off is What advice would you give to an aspiring YouTuber that's trying to create videos like you are, but maybe maybe has a lot to learn in that space with some of the things you talk about? What advice would you give to some of these people?
Starting out is the hardest part because YouTube doesn't know how to handle somebody brand new at first. You can give them SEO, you can give them words in your description that can try to lead them in the right direction. But if you don't have a core audience of 1,000 people to watch your video and tell YouTube what their tendencies are with your video, YouTube it can only guess what it's going to do. So the best way to get started and to get a foothold into YouTube is to make something so hyper niche and hyper specific that no matter how good or bad your video is, you're the only option, or maybe you're the best option for somebody who is looking up to go to. I knew that I was going to be semi successful, or at least not go completely unnoticed in YouTube, because I knew that I was one of the more qualified people to talk about ARCA racing guides. And even though I had 0 subscribers at the time, even though I'd never posted a video before, I knew that if somebody was looking up on YouTube iRacing ARCA, then, or for that track, I would be the first one to show up because nothing else exists. So I started out so hyper specific that I knew that I wasn't going to completely fail. And then once I got my audience that YouTube could use as a test group for data, then I started to expand while not alienating that initial group. And success on YouTube, in my opinion, is just taking that expansion and repeating it over and over and over again until you reach a point to where you cannot expand any further without alienating what you had before. And at that point, you either got to completely shift gears and risk it all, or you got to be happy with where you're at.
Mhm. Absolutely. Well, that's a perfect place to end, I feel like. And Justin, thank you so much for joining us here today on Next Gen Creators. And you were an awesome guest. It was a ton of fun. And again, learned a lot about, the iRacing community and also just kind of how you go about your videos and how calculated you are. It's so interesting to hear that, interesting to hear that perspective.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Justin Yee, DJ Yee-J here on Next Gen Creators. What a conversation that was with DJ Yee-J on Next Gen Creators. Thank you so much for tuning in here. Once again, be sure to follow us on social media at Daily Downforce on Twitter and Instagram, The Daily Downforce on Facebook. Head to dailydownforce.com as well for daily NASCAR content. And thank you so much for tuning in. It was an awesome conversation with DJ Yee-J, again talking about everything, talking about his story and content creation, his interesting philosophy, talk about a guy that just, he is a learner, and he is a guy that analyzes videos in ways that I never have, and it's so interesting to hear how he has used his knowledge and used his own observations to become very successful on YouTube, and also some interesting perspectives on the iRacing world and also the potential next NASCAR video game that iRacing has licensed for, or is licensed to make by NASCAR. Thank you so very much for tuning in here. Once again, this is Joshua Lepowski signing off on Next Gen Creators.